First of all, you should take a bar prep course. There are a lot of companies that offer this, from Barbary to Themis to Kaplan. These courses are worth the investment. The bar exam is testing a really esoteric set of rules in the law, and these courses do a really good job in consolidating what those are and giving you practice in those types of questions to prepare you for the exam. On top of that, they also offer video-based lectures which help make the material more digestible too. So while I have heard stories of people being able to pass the exam without taking one of these courses, that tends to be pretty rare, and these courses are a good investment. But you gotta make sure to actually do the work in the course. You would be surprised by how many of my classmates from Harvard and friends from Stanford got these courses, paid thousands of dollars, and then just did like 10 to 20% of them and then went into the exam with like basically no understanding of what was being tested. Some of these people actually passed, which infuriates me to no end, but there were many who ended up failing. And I mean, come on, this is common sense. If you don't actually study and do the work, then you're probably not gonna pass. This exam, again, is testing a very specific set of rules that you mostly memorize. If you're not putting in the work to memorize them, you should not expect to succeed. So in addition to participating in a bar prep course, you gotta actually do the work of the course. But you can get more out of these courses than just participating in them if you actually write your own outline that corresponds to the material that you're learning. And I say that because that's what I did when I prepared for the California bar exam, which notoriously is one of the most competitive and difficult exams to pass in the country. I'm not trying to brag, I'm just saying like it was scary and I wanted to take no chances whatsoever. So in addition to studying like 13 hours a day, I also wrote my own outline for all of the various rule statements that I knew I had to memorize in order to pass the exam. And in some ways, writing this outline is very similar to outlining for a law school class. You just want to take each legal doctrine that's being tested and then list out the various elements that you know you're going to need to discuss on, for example, the essay component of the exam. For example, in the subject of torts, if we were to use negligence as an example, here's what my outline would have. It would have negligence, and then it would have sub-bullets for each of the elements that are required in order for somebody to be found negligent in their conduct. And those 4 elements would be that there is a duty of care, there is a breach of duty of care, there is causation, and then there are damages. Having an outline like this for the bar exam can be super helpful because, again, the bar exam is testing your understanding of these rules, which a lot of the time come down to how much of them you've memorized. So having all of these rule statements in one consolidated place and in your words and in your understanding can be tremendously helpful in getting you to that point where all of these things come to you in seconds. I also think outlines are great because they can serve as a reference point for the concepts that are really tricky for you specifically, or for things that you get wrong in practice. For example, on multiple choice questions for the bar exam, when you're practicing and you get a question wrong, you should not just stop and say, okay, the answer was A, I put C, I kind of understand why it's A, I'm gonna move on now. Instead, the first thing you need to do is understand why you got it wrong. Like, why did you choose C when the answer was A? And the second point is that you need to know why A is correct. And you need to have the mindset that is drilled in so that the next time you get asked a question that is testing the identical concept in the one you got wrong, you'll never get it wrong again. The way that I did this when I got a multiple choice question wrong is I'd identify the point of law that I misstated or didn't understand, or maybe I just didn't memorize it, and I'd specifically put that point of law in my outline. That way I knew that when I'd go to review my outline, which I inevitably did like 50 plus times before the exam, I knew that I'd review that point of law that I was weak on. So write your own outline and make sure that during your practice processes, you're addressing the weak points of law that you need support on. Now, pretty much every bar exam in the United States has an essay component. It's not enough to just do multiple choice. You need to know how to write, and in order to write well, you need to know how to put down the points of law that are being tested very succinctly and specifically worded. You can actually get a passing score on the bar exam with very little being written down. This is not like law school exams where writing more arguments for either side is going to necessarily get you more points. Instead, most often what the bar examiners are looking for is that you understand and are able to state in your own words, but also in a way that matches their answer key, the points of law that are being tested. So just like law school, when you go through a fact pattern, first of all, do an issue spotting exercise and figure out what are the issues that are potentially popping up here and what is the question they're actually asking on the exam. Sometimes these exams are open-ended, just like in law school, and they're saying, you know, argue both sides how this could be a tort. But other times they're not, and they're saying argue specifically for the plaintiff that they should win the case based on a breach of contract from the defendant. And then your job is to only argue that one side. So make sure you pay close attention to what the prompt is asking. And when you write your answers, the most important thing that you need to do is word for word regurgitate the doctrinal elements and the rule statements for the points of law that are being tested. I cannot emphasize this enough. It is so much more important for you to just regurgitate law than it is to come up with creative arguments for either side or like develop a new theory on the exam on the fly. The bar exam is rigid. It's here's the box with all of the different rules that you need need to know in order to pass. Now I'm gonna like move these pieces around, and your job is to unmove them around and spit back to me what I just gave you, which was that box at the beginning. It's not theory, it's not philosophy, it's just memorize this giant set of rules and then spit it back to me in different ways so I know you understand it. And last but not least is timing. There are so many people that don't pass the exam because they don't do a good enough job of watching the clock to make sure that they have adequate time to finish the multiple choice section or finish all of the essays. And so at the very end, they end up scrambling, sometimes leaving entire essays blank or just guessing on like a third of the multiple choice questions. The way that you avoid that is by paying close attention to the clock and forcing yourself to move on when you've spent a certain amount of time on a specific question or on a specific essay. A rule of thumb that I used when I took the exam was to watch the timing in increments of 4. So for example, if I only had 2 hours for the multiple choice question section, I'd break that up into 4 30-minute sections each. If there were 100 questions on the multiple choice section for that 2-hour period, that means that per every 30 minutes, I would need to do 25 questions. So after 30 minutes had passed by, I'd look at the timer, I'd say, okay, 30 minutes has gone by, how many questions have I done? If it was less than 25, then I had to speed up. I'd put my best guesses down, and then I'd move on to the next set of 25 questions. If I was ahead of the clock, which in my case, I happened to be a lot of the time because I worked really hard and practiced a ton beforehand, then I was in good shape and I didn't need to stress. But the point is that you cannot get engrossed in trying to figure out like one specific question or like writing one essay at the expense of the rest of the exam. Instead, you gotta triage accordingly and use your judgment. You gotta throw away the questions that you might really want to get correct, but in the end, they're just wasting your time, and move on to try to hit more points in the other parts of the test. This last point on the bar exam is more of a general one, but it bears mentioning. The bar exam is a memorization-based exam. I've alluded to this before, but I'll say it again. This is not a theoretical or a philosophical or a critical thinking test. This is not the LSAT, which is like an IQ test. This is strictly a memorize everything and then regurgitate it out in different formats for the test takers to see that you understand it test. So remember that when you're preparing, that it is a grind, it is intense. Of course, it's a lot of pressure because this is the last step that you need to take to become a practicing lawyer, but it is 100% gameable with enough work and dedication. And don't give up if you don't pass the first time. I have so many friends who failed the first time and ended up passing on their second time, some of them their third time. If you want to get into law school or you're interested in becoming a lawyer, I have a guide to getting into law school. It's the price of a cup of coffee and it's down in the caption. Smash that sub button. I'll see you around, folks.